Talk about assistive technology because the course is about assistive technology. So talk about definitions, what is disability, range of disabilities, the people involved, the numbers of people, goals of rehabilitation, needs of people with disabilities, perception of people with disabilities, examples of assistive technology and phraseology, semantics, social correctness, and we'll have a look at some last year's projects and class sessions, okay? So definitions, talk about, these are the top 4 definitions that we'll be talking about. So disability itself has a lot of definitions, and it depends on who needs to define it, okay? If you're work for the government and you need to know how many people are unemployed due to disability, that will be your basis for defining people with disabilities. So, so in that case, a person with a disability are those who have health problems or conditions which prevents them from working or limits the kind or amount of work that can be that they can do. The VA has their own definition, and it's based on a percentage, which I haven't quite figured out, and so is partially based on the loss of limbs or sensory things, so that interferes with normal life function. So you heard of people that have 100% disability. I'm not sure what that means, but that's how they relate it. A more refined definition of disability is the limitations on a person's activities due to a health condition. And activities are broad enough to include not only work, but also housework, taking care of personal and household needs, and other age-appropriate technologies, even like sports and going to school and stuff. The World Health Organization has it divided down into 3 issues: impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. So the impairment is the problem with your body or its structure, okay? And those impairments cause a limitation in the kind of activities that you can do, which result in an inability to participate in a particular activity, okay? So it's not just about you, but it's about society as well. Features of a person, body, and society, which includes environmental and social barriers. So if you have a disability and people don't want to hire you because you look funny or have special needs or whatever, that's a social issue, okay? People with disability may have a narrower margin of health due to poverty or social exclusion, and maybe their disability requires additional health care to take care of bed sores or infections, okay? And people with disabilities may have difficulty accessing those kinds of health treatments that would help them. In this country, we talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act from 1990, where they define disability as a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more major life activities. So we have the activities in there. And so I was thinking about this, and so I can come up with my own definition. I can do that as a lecturer, you don't know. But so I thought of it as a health condition that prevents a person from taking advantage of life's opportunities, okay? And that can be broad enough to include, going to Stanford, okay? But there are, as you know, lots of people with disabilities here at Stanford, okay? And even a more general definition includes any situation that prevents a person from taking advantage of their talents and opportunities. And so if the example is, if you're like a concert pianist and your country happens to be at war, that's not going to help you with your talents. So your talents are wasted. So that's a kind of disability as well. In the U.S., there's lots of people with disabilities, 23%. And globally, there's over 1 billion people with disabilities. There's people with severe disabilities. There's children with disabilities. There's lots of healthcare costs related to disabilities, and people with disabilities is the largest minority group. And people who are over 65, there's lots of them around, and they have health problems as well. There are people with vision impairments. There's people with hearing impairments. There's lots of people who use wheelchairs. Lots of people with developmental disabilities. But less than 5% of people are born with their disability. So it's could be acquired by accident or injury during your life. And interestingly, 12% of Stanford students have registered with the Office of Accessible Education with a disability. So disability rates varies by lots of variables, including age, gender, ethnicity, where you live, and if you're working or not. So here's the big issue right here. If you have a disability, you may have a reduced chance for employment, education and employment. And if you don't have education, you can't get employed, you're not making money, and you're in poverty. So that's the track. So almost 28% of working age individuals with disability live in poverty. And as we all age, the people experiencing limitations due to age will increase. But with so many people with disabilities, it's not a rare event. So the best thing I've heard about considering people with disabilities and older adults, they are a normal variation of the human condition. It's just a variation. Disability types: you can be born with a disability, you can acquire it during your life. The disabilities may be physical, which may be due to the impairments with seeing or hearing. They may be functional due to limitations in walking or balance. They may also be mental or neurological. You could have a stroke. It's a kind of disability. Or there's lots of other kinds of mental conditions that are also considered disabilities. Disabilities can be long-term, or they can be temporary. If you've broken a leg or something, you get better from that. But if you have a disability, you can still be president, okay? Which president is that? Who knows? FDR, right, okay. Not very many pictures of him in a wheelchair. Why do you think that was? Remember we were at war? Oh, you don't remember that. But a president with a disability may be a sign of a country's weakness. So you want to have a strong president, okay? And here's his wheelchair and braces that he had. I think he had polio. But even if you have a disability, you can go to school. You can be a person with a disability in Second Life. You can compete in sports, or you can be a part of what looks like a really cool group, gang, okay? So that doesn't limit you. People with disabilities, of course, you want to be as well as you can be. You want to function as well as you can. You want to be able to do things for yourself. You want to have a high quality of living. You want to take full advantage of all the opportunities, as I mentioned. You want to pursue happiness, and you want to have the freedom to integrate with other people. You want to be the same as other people, but maybe you want to be in a club with other people who are deaf, and maybe you want to be known for your own talents, okay? So that's what's needed. In the U.S., there's lots of people with disabilities. Kids are mainstreamed in schools, and we have the Americans with Disabilities Act that gives them equality in a lot of ways. In other countries, they often don't have that luxury. They're hidden away. They don't go to school. They never get out. In places like Japan, they really like coming up with high-tech solutions. So that's interesting. So here's a cartoon strip of Dilbert. And so we got Dilbert, the boss, and a prospective employee in Dilbert. And the boss says, "I'm looking for an employee who's creative." And the job seeker says, that's me. I have ADHD and dyslexia. I'm bipolar and a schizophrenic. And Dilbert checks the internet and says, that's surprising. Each of his conditions is highly correlated with creativity. And the job seeker says, are you a normal? And the boss says, I think so. And says, well, I feel sorry for you. Must be hard going through life without any creativity. And so that's just another slant on this. And there are people with autism who are extremely bright, and they're very talented, and they work out very well in companies. So even if you have a disability, you can be a great worker. So here's another question for you, and I don't want the community members to respond to this because they might have seen this last year. Identify a large group of individuals who spend 12 to 25 years in institutions before they can contribute significantly to society. Who needs a clue? Okay. A clue is, well, here's a really good clue. They don't have job prospects. That's one clue. And the other one that I think you'll get is that they're a huge financial burden to their parents. Students, right? Yeah, because you guys have an incomplete education, right? Have you ever thought of yourself like that? No, because you're around other students with the same situation. But if you were to try to get a job now before you graduate, you might have a hard time. And it's too bad that you can't have these things downloaded into you like they did in the Matrix. You know, think about the educational system. How many years you spend in school, how many problems you have to solve, and how much money you spend. It's a very arduous, time-consuming activity. You know, just getting to the point where you know enough to help others. It's tough. And physically, if you're over 24, you're over the hill, because they've tested the cognitive and motor performance declines after 24. Well, I'm on my third hill. I'm still here. So maybe we should talk about ability as having the talents and opportunities to contribute to society. Okay, and about 5 years ago, I drew this graph of plotting ability versus age. And you know, when you're an infant, you can't do anything, you know, except, I mean, you're totally dependent on your parents. And after a while, you can sit up and you learn to walk, and balance is a big deal, and riding a two-wheeler is a big deal, right? And when I went to school, you had to be in 4th grade where you learned, rather than printing, you learned cursive. And of course, another high point is learning how to drive. And so these are abilities, and maybe it tapers off at the end, but you know, cognitive ability still is around. So talking about political correctness here, so I'll talk about how we refer to each other. So when you talk about people with disabilities, always put the person first rather than conditions. So you talk about people with a disability, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Focus on the capabilities rather than limitations. And refer to the person rather than the group. So you don't want to say the blind, the deaf, the disabled, because that excludes them. So you want to, so here we have the people and the disabled. We don't want to do that. So, and this is a mistake they make all the time. They talk about the elderly and people like that. And in the UK, they talk about, there's two groups, the people and the royals, okay? And in the US, maybe we have the people and celebrities, but that's not what I'm talking about today. We want to be inclusive, so people with disabilities are part of people, and maybe they should be sprinkled through that people area. And of course, we have a long history of being inclusive. The Constitution starts out with "we the people." I mean, what more inclusive thing can you say? Okay, so more about people first. It's a language. The basic idea is to impose a sentence structure that names the person first and the disability second, because they're people first and their disability is secondary. And you can think of a whole list of attributes that you have. And you might say, I'm a guy, I'm a senior, I'm going to Stanford, I'm taking Dave's assistive technology course, and I like this and that and the other thing. But it would be wrong to identify you, oh, that's the person who uses the scooter. So when you think about defining yourself and defining others, you should always put maybe the disability at the very end, okay? So there are terms called shorthand terms for paraplegic and quadriplegic, which are perfectly okay, but there's other terms like crip, retard, and stuff like that where you don't use to refer about people who are in the disability group. If you happen to be a person with a wheelchair in a group, you can call your colleagues, crips and stuff, and they do that, but you don't do that if you're not a part of that group, okay? And there's a lot of terms that I like to talk about. There's if you're a patient, you're under a doctor's care. If you're a user, you're dealing with a product. If you're a subject, you're a part of a research experiment or trial. If you're a consumer, you're in a position to buy things. And you never say suffering, okay? Never. So you need to never say you suffered from a head injury or suffered from an accident or stuff like that, because who knows what suffering really means? There's no metric. So last year, I had some students in my class who were suffering from a bad hair day. Is that really suffering? No. So let's not go there. You can say experienced, diagnosed with, living with, survivor of, recovering from. You try to use positive terms when talking about people. Another term that is sort of out of favor now is when you say inspiring. Oh, you as a disabled person, you really inspire me because you're doing all these things that I didn't expect you to do. Well, that's not a problem for the person with a disability. It's your perception of that. So don't say that about people with disability, or even about anyone, because you can say, oh, I'm so inspired that you made it into Stanford. I mean, what does that say? They had a low expectation of you, right? And you don't say you lost the battle with your disease, because it's not really up to you in a lot of cases if you're win or lose. You're not in control. The disease is control. There's been a lot of use of medical terms like crippled, retarded, deaf and dumb and lame that used to be in favor. Now they're not in favor. And as well as things like mute, moron, imbecile, idiot, and spastic. They used to be perfectly descriptive terms, medically descriptive terms, but they're out of favor now. The only one that's still being used is persistent vegetative state, which is not good. And actually, when they're selling books and stuff, they have the Dummy's Guide and the Idiot's Guide, and I always wondered, when I'm standing in front of the book, and I would say to myself, am I qualified to buy this book or not? It's a strange marketing tactic. Yeah. Portrayal of people with disabilities, a lot of it is in films. My first recollections of movies I've seen were, Pinocchio and Peter Pan, and disabilities there, right? And here we have Quasimodo. He goes to Notre Dame, right? And we have a pirate. Pirate's occupation is very risky because this guy's got an eye patch, a hook, and a peg leg. And then we have folks that we all sort of know and love, like the Munchkins from Wizard of Oz, right? And there's been a lot of recent movies. Dolphin Tale is actually a real story about a group of people who made a prosthetic tail for a dolphin, and they made a sequel. And of course, Harry Potter, The King's Speech, all about people with disabilities. We got Dr. Strangelove and Gary Busey, and then there's a whole mess of other people with disabilities who are famous that we all know about. Anybody know what Moses' disability was? Okay, I was going to offer a free cookie. But, there's some Stanford people that with disabilities. I put in Adam Savage because I just found out that he has an ear condition that he has a hearing impairment from, not from all the explosions, but a physical deficit in his ear. And a couple years ago, I added some more. Yeah, Rudolph, had this. It was different. Richard III, he had scoliosis. He had armor that was like a brace for him. So he was actually, his armor was his brace, and he did really good in combat. So that was interesting. Edison and Arnold Palmer both had hearing impairments. Tracy Morgan had that brain injury that he recovered from. Jerry Seinfeld is on the autism spectrum. And if anybody can identify whose handprint that is, it gets an extra cookie. No, Jerry Garcia. Some more people from movies, Nemo, Dory, Tiny Tim, Geordie LaForge, Star Trek people, and all the male characters, and even Penny from The Big Bang Theory have disabilities, and I can talk about them if you want. Then the superheroes with disability, Superman has this fantastic, allergy to kryptonite. So, I mean, that's his big downfall, right? But then there's other people from the X-Men. Here we have Jean-Luc Picard, okay, in a motorized wheelchair, okay. In this upper picture, it looks like he's in an exoskeleton. There's another guy in a manual wheelchair over there. And in this picture, he's in a jet-powered wheelchair. So you can be a superhero and still have a disability, okay? Here's a colleague, Robert Van Etten. I'm going to ask you what would be the appropriate thing to call him. The answer is Bob. That's his name. He's a person first, and that's his name. But there are people who try to create their own identity that's different from everybody else. People in the Blue Man Group, they're not disabled, but they just bring attention to themselves. Let's talk about assistive technology. So a piece of assistive technology can be a device, which is any item that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. I have my own definition. I broke it down into 3 pieces: devices, services, and policies. A device is one, as I mentioned. A service provides these kind of resources, and policies are laws and regulations and legislation that mandate the provision of these devices. So that's what assistive technology is. And engineers employ an assistive technology process to design, develop, and bring to market new devices. So assistive technology devices work because they enable people with disabilities to do tasks that they were formerly unable to accomplish or had difficulty accomplishing or required assistance through an enhanced or alternative method of interacting with the world. But isn't that what we all do? We have devices that make it easy for everyone to accomplish things that we're not able to accomplish on our own. We need a device to do that. And these devices come from emerging technologies and fields like robotics and computers, mechatronics, nanotechnology, wearable devices, medical technologies, all things that we're familiar with. And all this leads me to believe that basically everything is assistive technology. Our lighting, our buildings, the internet, computers, medical technology, the roads, cars, air travel. But what's the most awesome piece of assistive technology that you're using right now? Stanford University, because it's providing you with an excellent education. You can't do it yourself. You can't teach yourself what Stanford teaches you. So Stanford is assistive technology. So there's a lot of people who work in the field: physicians, engineers, clinicians, therapists, people who make policy, educators like me, caregivers, When we talk about rehabilitation, I broke it down into two things. The medical model, which is restoration of function through surgery, medication, therapy, pills, retraining. But a more inclusive model includes assistive technology devices. And the goal of rehabilitation is to restore function and wellness, and assistive technology adds that increased independence and improved quality of life. So rehab engineering is a total approach to rehabilitation that combines medicine and engineering and related science to improve the quality of life with persons with disabilities. There are people called rehab engineers who do things like design devices, do research and development, technology transfer, marketing, providing them, and educating and training people. Okay. There's all sorts of fields of rehab engineering. I call them facets. I belong to this professional group, and they had these special interest groups on things like computer applications, rural rehabilitation, robotics, job accommodation, universal access, and so on. So rehab technology includes rehab engineering, assistive technology, devices, and services. This is an important slide. So we've learned that there's many people with disabilities both in the U.S. and in the world, but maybe the largest homogeneous group are people that use wheelchairs. Okay, but you have to realize we're talking about people, and every person is an individual with their own characteristics, personality, challenges, circumstances, goals, and preferences. So everybody has an individual kind of need. So given that, the products that are sold to the mass market. So you can bring down the price of things by selling millions of iPhones and stuff that everybody can use. But in the assistive technology market, everybody is different. So it's really hard to come up with a product that serves more than 50,000 people at a time, because they all have to be sort of customized. Even a wheelchair has to be customized for the individual. So what that means is that companies that serve individuals with disabilities and older adults are small companies, and their products are very expensive because they're almost custom products, and that includes hardware and software. And you can get around that a little bit by designing products that will meet the needs of lots of people on both ends of the spectrum to the greatest extent possible. And one example of that is at Stanford. Remember where the Meyer Library used to be? They have a big dished-in area, and there are stairs on both sides. Well, how do you get down to the bottom if you're pushing a buggy or you're in a wheelchair? Well, they've cleverly made this spiral walkway that goes from the top to the bottom. So that's to make it accessible, and that's sort of cool. Other more common examples are the oxo peeler, plugs, that sort of neat stairway that's also a ramp, and of course curb cuts, and some of these faucets that you just have to touch to turn on and off. So now I'm going to talk about some projects that I worked on. Oh, I hope this works. I worked on this device. This is back in like '83. This is a head control interface for people who are quadriplegics and can't use their hands. Developed a system that looks at a person's head position to operate the chair. And I'm not sure if I'm hooked up to the internet or not, so we'll give that a try. Yes. Oh no, I can do this. Except I got to go over there to type in. Bear with me. The video will be worth it. Now it'll work. I almost had this figured out. So there's me before I start coloring my hair gray. So I'm controlling the head by tilting it forward, backward, left, or right to make turns or go faster or slower. And there's a switch on the back that turns the whole thing on and off. How many people think that's cool? All right. I did that. And I tried to basically give the technology away, and nobody wanted it. So it's their loss. Finger spelling hand. If you're a person who is deaf and blind, the way you communicate is by having a human interpreter finger spell letters of the alphabet into your hand. So I did this robot with a group of people that sort of translates letters typed into its computer into the gestures that make up the finger spelling alphabet. There's a bunch of servos in there and a little computer, and this cable goes to a computer, and I'm typing in letters. So it has a bunch of servo motors in there. And the person who is deafblind would feel that and understand what was being said to them. So you don't need it could be used over on a computer as well. Oh, so now it can go really fast. Yeah, this is just a prototype that people weren't interested in. Come on. Oh. I worked on this driving simulator at the VA, 3 screens, and the idea was that if you want to be able to assess people after they've had a brain injury or a stroke, to assess whether or not they'll still be able to drive. And so it's sort of risky putting them in a car and seeing if they don't hit things, okay? So this is a safer way of doing that. So that was a lot of fun. Other devices. Oh, God, we only got 10 minutes. Oh, we're almost done. This is a brain-computer interface that Gemma designed a on-screen keyboard. So you basically, it would scroll through the rows of the letters, and you blink when the row includes a letter that you desire with your eye, and then it goes through a couple other stages to actually pick the letter. So if you don't have use of your hands, that would be the way to do it. And you maybe see this on 60 Minutes. This woman has a plug in her brain, and she can control the robotic arm in the foreground. There's a bunch of 3D printed hands for kids. It's not really clear how functional they are, or if it's just a toy or just something to show off. But a lot of people are doing it, and also in developing countries. And here's one in pink, all using just existing 3D printing technology. If you're into the Transformers, here's a Panasonic product that transforms from a flatbed into a wheelchair, which would help transferring the person from a bed to a wheelchair. So that's sort of neat. But you can use a lot of commercial products for people with disabilities so they can do the things, especially with Google Glass. Notice on the bottom here, this woman defines herself first as a New Yorker, a law student, and then a quadriplegic. So that's what's her levels of attributes. So they use that to take pictures because they don't have good use of their hands. You can do things for people with dementia, including tableware sets, including this one here that Sha Yao designed as a student, won an award at the Stanford Center on Longevity's Design Challenge, and is now on the market. And hopefully we'll be hearing from her later in the course and seeing that. But assistive technology products also extend to animals too. And if you go to PBS and search for bionic pets, you'll see how assistive technology can be used for animals. Oops, sorry. You can also make a statement with a custom wheelchair. Here's a steampunk wheelchair. And you know, we wear clothes and that sort of defines us, but people wear wheelchairs all the time. Their wheelchair can define them, and that could be a positive thing as well if you have a wheelchair that looks like this. And there's smoke that comes out of the back as well. For people who have essential tremor, 2 Stanford students invented this LiftWear, which is bought by Google and is now on the market. It compensates for the involuntary tremors and is really neat. You might remember this iBot standing wheelchair. It was sold by Johnson & Johnson for a number of years that balanced on 2 wheels, which was novel at the time. It's sort of an offshoot of the Segway. But they were selling these for $25,000 each, which actually isn't a lot for a power wheelchair. But the important thing is they were losing money on each one they sold. So that's not a good strategy for having a viable product. So they are no longer being made. But maybe Toyota, this is a prototype from Toyota, they may resurrect it. You'll see some community members who use this wheelchair. It's called a Will wheelchair, and they designed it to be very aesthetic so that people would want to buy it because it looks so good. They have a new version on the market, and just a couple of days ago they announced from the CES show that they have one that's autonomous that can take you through the airport and stuff like that. So that's sort of cool. Oh, some projects from last year. Creative expression for Danny. He has an easel that he can rotate around so he can paint on all sides. Monitor for a door for a facility that will detect whether the user is at home or not. So that was electronic. Here's Abby and her wheelchair with that the students figured out a way to put her artwork on the chair and also provide it with some illumination. This is a really ambitious project to add camber to a wheelchair. We had a couple projects with the Magical Bridge. This is a prototype of an arm-powered spinning ride. Another team did a scale model of a walkway. As you walk over it, lights light up and sounds happen, so that was pretty neat. This is a brace lock for somebody with stand-up braces. This is a body-powered harness, you know, a hook that they've actually added a motor to make it a hybrid, so it works both by mechanically and it's also motorized. These students made a work tray for Fernanda, who you'll see on Thursday. This is an example of an individual project. Elliot made a dresser which actually turned into like a desk storage area for Danny, who will also be here on Thursday. And a student did a CAD design of elbow mover for Angie Lee, who's a Stanford student. So let's go through some of the class sessions to wrap this up. This is last year at the first session. We're in a different classroom, but everybody's smiling, so that was good. This is pitch day from last year. We have the first class session on need finding, where we have an exercise. Students work in teams to understand how to interview people with disabilities. Debbie's here with some of her stroke patients. She'll be here again. This is going to be the best lecture. These are Stanford students with disability telling their story about themselves and how they are great Stanford students despite, well, a bunch of disabilities that they have. Gary will talk about prosthetics, exoskeleton stuff, exoskeleton research. Exoskeleton company will actually demonstrate one of these exoskeletons. So that'll be popular. This is Shah, just talking about her product. Peter Axelson, a longtime colleague, will be here. He has a company in Nevada that does a lot of stuff with sports adaptations. We go to the Magical Bridge Playground and everybody's going to be a kid again. including me, which I found very hard to do. Getting on a slide was actually very fearful for me. Midterm presentations, we had a talk on gait analysis, which we're not going to have this year. I went to the VA, and they had a bunch of devices for recreational aspects, hand-powered bikes. Lindsay Felt, a faculty person here, will talk about her cochlear implants. The Assistive Technology Fair, there'll be a bunch of companies showing off their stuff. And we learned that a dog, a service dog, is assistive technology. Film movie night. Wrap it up with Ralph talking about wheelchair fabrication in developing countries. And final presentations and demonstrations. And these projects come from the community, or students define them, or I come up with some. And here's a list of them. Basically, these are projects with bunches of people. And I have a few projects in mind. And some other people that you can call on to help you with your project are these folks who have been involved with the course for a long time, except Matteo. He's from Ireland, and he's here in a Fulbright scholarship, and he came here just to attend my course, but he's at CES today, so you'll see him next week. If you're working on a project, these are the TAs in the PRL, and Elliot will talk about what the PRL does on Thursday. These are people that can help you with your project. The other people that you'll see are people who suggested the projects, people with disabilities coming here to class, and community members. So in summary, flexible course focused on building confidence, enhancing professional skills. Lectures, projects, field trips are the things that you'll see. Opportunities for class participation. Lots of assistive technology projects. And assistive technology benefits everyone. Everything is assistive technology. There's a website. There's my contact information. And if you're working on an individual project, you may want to meet afterwards. There's an opportunity for you to pair with somebody to work on something together. So we have 20 seconds for questions, even silly questions. Boy, I'm getting so good at doing this. Yeah. So the bottom part, fill out for every class, so that you're rating me, and then there's a one-page sheet that you can fill out, that I want you to fill out too, talking about how you heard about the class and why you decided to take it. So if you haven't filled that out, you can do that now. Any other questions? I hope you had a, yes? Or what's on the website? I will give you maps and stuff. Anybody can go to the Magical Bridge Playground. We're sort of limited, but we're sort of limited with the number of people that can attend the VA. The Magical Bridge Playground field trip is open to everybody, so invite your friends. Everybody will have a good time. Get a chance to go on the slides and everything. And you get a chance to spin me around as fast as you can. So that's got to be motivation, right? Okay, any remaining questions? Well, I want to thank you for choosing the course, and I guarantee we'll have lots of fun, and you'll learn something that you can use in your professional career. Okay, so as soon as you're done with filling everything out, you're free to leave or stick around, ask me a personal question, or personally ask me a question, whatever. So, thank you. Okay, Kevin, turn it off.